Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to PBL Part 2, where we're going to be talking about the messy middle and the end. So we're kind of putting the middle and the end together. And feel free to say hi in the chat. And again, Jen is back with us. So I'm going to bring her on. And I know a lot of you loved her from Part 1, where she talked about kind of just the organization of it, especially from your Facebook and Twitter comments. I really do appreciate all those shout outs because she is amazing. Um, but we talked about, that beginning part of PBL. And if you missed that beginning part of PBL, no worries, it was recorded. So you can always go back. The recording is available and it's also on the slide deck. So I'm going to throw that link into the chat and then Jen, you can get started.
All right. If you missed part one, my name is Jennifer Kirk, and I am in no means an expert in this topic, but I played with it for the first time last year. So I just thought I would share my experience, and I would love to collaborate with others on any PBL they have done and how they run it. The messy middle is what I called this, because once you get everything organized and you actually start it, that is the scariest thing when you're kind of like a little bit of a control freak. You're like, okay, I'm about to lose control of everything. Here we go. But I gotta say, I feel like my students, after especially the second time I did it, they learned so much more, exponentially more than I could have taught them in, say, direct instruction or even partner work on a short content topic. So I'm excited to share how that all went down. So the recap, just real quick, the first project I did, I only gave them 2 topics to choose from. I only gave them 1 means of presentation. I was super tight-fisted with the control. It was a hybrid learning environment where I saw them only twice a week, and the rest they were virtual. It was hard to monitor virtual project advancement, and so I was scared of having all of these topics out there. So I did a little animation, Stephanie, so if you hit enter, I am just going to focus, I'm just going to focus on project 2, because I feel like that was really more true to project-based learning than the first time I tried it. It had more collaboration, it had more accountability, it had the authentic audience was the same for both, and really all of them had those pieces, but having all the infinitely many topics that you could pick from and just working one-on-one with one person, I could see their learning path much clearer, and having more options in presentation made them feel more in charge. So that's just sort of like a recap of everything we did on the first time.
And I think too, every time you do a PBL project, it's going to get easier and easier because you have your templates made for how you want to organize it. You're going to make little tweaks to different things that you're like, that did not work out. And this is what I'm going to do instead. And then I think also you get your students' feedback and they get used to your different like standard operating procedures when it comes to SE or PBL, and they kind of understand all that kind of stuff.
Oh, for sure. And the classroom management of it was like non-existent the second time, because they didn't have to ask those like, well, you didn't tell us what you want us to do. I'm like, I want you to solve your problem. They're just like, wait, but you didn't tell us how to solve the problem. Exactly, I didn't. So anyway, and as I got more comfortable with it, they got more comfortable with it. So, and then you're willing to take more risks in other areas. So big ideas for the messy middle is students have to have a driving question. And that's something we didn't talk about when we're planning it, because the students have to decide that. When you I gave them topics to pick from, but ultimately they could come up with their own. They just had to get it approved. So it's literally infinitely many topics. And then they have to decide, what question do I want to know the answer to, but I have to show this kind of math to do it. So this one was systems of equations. They had to do basically 2 different scatter plots two different lines of best fit, find out what that intersection means. Did they intersect? What does it mean? All of that, finding the answer to a question in their topics. So that was how my math project worked. So the driving question was super important, and they had to decide that pretty early on. That was actually in their, when they told me who their partner was, they came up with a rough draft of their driving question. And then when we met together, we kind of honed in like, okay, you can't solve this giant problem today with two equations and figure out like how you're going to solve, I don't know, pollution or something. But, what information would be helpful on that topic if we would just whittle it down to something much more specific and less broad. They need guidance on how to find reputable resources. They know some things though. I mean, I was pretty excited that seventh graders knew like, okay, Wikipedia is probably not my best place to go. But they weren't sure about other sites. Like, is this really an educational, like, is this really real data? Because that's what essentially they're doing for math is they're collecting all these data points and they had to get them from somewhere. So that was one of those where you can come up, guide from the side places. Another place was checking their progress often enough. Even though a group they work well independently and maybe they know the content, but just leaving them alone too long, they either work really fast and then don't do anything on the project because they think they're done. And here you didn't check on them to say, oh, you're missing this, this, and this. And then they freak out, or they aren't moving at all. They're stuck. They're too scared to ask you. So that checking in often, I scheduled it so that they had to be at a certain place by that time. And it worked out really well like that. I highly recommend those three things is what the messy middle does. We'll talk about how we're going to grade it. The messy middle for grading is really towards the end. So
yeah, and I think just knowing like they're going to need check-ins, even just to say, hey, you are doing the right thing, that, assures them, and you're able to kind of drive them into the right way if they are off track, if you're doing those multiple check-ins. And so I think there's a couple different ways you could do that. We were hybrid. So I know Jen had Google Meets and appointment slots, and kids were able to like sign up that way, or she told them a time and you're meeting this time. But even if you are back in person, your other groups can be working independently, and then you can bring them up whenever during that class period to check in on them.
Oh, for sure. And they knew, if they came to their check-in unprepared with any advancement from the last check-in, they knew they'd come with heads down, like, I didn't do what I was supposed to do. So-and-so did his part and I didn't do my part or whatever. They were very honest, but also knew that meant you were doubling up because the presentation is for a live audience that is not flexible. Like people have taken time out of their jobs to come and listen to what you have to say. So you're not going to get out of it. You're just postponing it. So
yeah, so true.
So this was, we touched on these things in the first part about their project management log, and that is a huge collaboration piece and where we would start most of our check-in time together. We would talk about, this looks the same. Have you not been working on it? Or, okay, you have this item down. What does that look like? Show me what you've done on this. So that was kind of where all of my check-ins began, was on this management log. Also, I attached that unit, the hook, the slides that I originally gave them for the unit. And I just kind of wanted to highlight slide number 3, because that's where I gave them just some idea topics. I had already collected resources for those topics and I put them in the comments at the bottom. So they could go, okay, I want to talk about is a fair minimum wage right now? and I had different links on there, and some of these links, any of the topics are there. They just had to put them in like the search of the website, and then they could find. And so I was trying to help them with this reputable resources thing, especially with math. When you need to gather specific data, it's very challenging to find exactly what you want them to find. And then they weren't limited to those resources by any means. It was just a starting point, and it also helped them with their driving question. If they were having trouble narrowing it down, well, let me look. We're interested in, say, immigration, and we don't know what to do about it. Like, we don't know what we want to know about that. So if they put that keyword into one of these websites, and maybe they read some articles and they're like, oh, I want to know about this thing. Like, how does immigration affect, the economy in Southern California? I don't know. I'm just making something up. But they would find some articles there. So it helped with both their research for the actual project and actually finding out what they want to know. So if going to slide 6 through 11 on the same slides, is all the different ways that Stephanie and I at the time could think of them presenting. And then there was links to, there we go. So there was links on how does that look? Here's some templates you can use. You don't have to use the templates. Like, I know some of my kids really like Prezi because it has that. It zooms in on the thing and then it zooms back out, and they just think that's super cool. Nobody did create an app for me. And I was really bummed because I was really wanting to see how that would look. But infographics are just like posters. So when Stephanie and I were brainstorming some other ways, if you go back to the main slide deck, Stephanie come up with a couple other things. So a Google site, we were thinking, oh, we're Google School. We have Google Sites. They can make a website with different pages that explains the different parts of their project. And then you can like publish it. Like, it could be something that could now become a reputable resource for somebody else, which is really cool. But we didn't have that on that original one. So I thought that was really cool. And then the next one she came up with, which I adore this one, I think freshmen would especially go nuts over the social media campaign and talk about their knowledge of the topic. And she has a couple of templates there.
Yeah. And so as we were brainstorming, I thought I lost this document. I thought I threw it away.
We were panicking.
So in the process of me thinking I threw this away, I was like, oh, I'll just remake it. And I'm like, I don't even remember what was on it. And so I was just like creating, and then we found out that Google Sites and the social media one was not on it. But this could be really good for the next project. And I think offering different options to kids. And I know sometimes you'll have a kid that's going to pick a Google presentation every time. And so maybe having that conversation with him, like, okay, you've been doing this, but I think you'll really like Google Sites. And I think sometimes too, like, they're like, oh, I'm presenting to an audience, but you could present using a Google site. You can present using a social media campaign, and you're kind of talking about what that will look like as you roll out the process. And so there's different Instagram templates that the kids could have picked. There's a Snapchat one. And I mean, so much of their world is social media in today's world. And so just thinking about how can they present that information differently than just a Google site. And so we were just trying to think outside the box as well.
Well, and I think the whole hashtag thing is pretty cool. Like, if they had their,
Mm-hmm.
stop ocean pollution, or, you know what I mean? They could have their own little hashtag that goes with their project, would be pretty neat. And they could see people reposting about it. I don't know. I just thought that was a pretty neat thing. So keeping track, I guess, is my big idea for the messy middle, is like, you want to make sure you have as much information about every kid and their progress. So I required students to share their slides with me like right away. So they were working on their presentation and it had nothing on it, but they're still sharing it with me. And then I can review it based on their log. right? And my communication to them, everything was pushed out on Google Classroom. So there was no like multiple places to go to find what they needed to do. It was just a topic that I made. So everything that said, project for unit 3, every little document, everything they needed, all in one spot. Um, I highly recommend that this is not just an at-home homework assignment, that they get to have class time. I know class time is really precious, and it really was with hybrid because we only saw them twice a week. But if I made a project work day, they were much more likely to come up to me and ask for help than they were when they were at home. They wouldn't email me, they wouldn't reach out. Um, I don't understand why exactly the dynamic. I guess they felt like, I don't know, when they were at home, they just felt like they were supposed to know. I never did figure out the reason behind it, but it's true. They will come to you if you're available. Um, and like check-ins, I made them mandatory where we talked about that. And uh, some of them had like amazing data and then didn't really know what to do with it, even though they'd had the lessons. So those meetings, I forced them to talk to me about what was going on. And I took notes on everything we did that. I did that on Padlet, but lots of ways to do it. Steph shared with us a way to do that on a Google Sheet where you can just share a tab. I think I would probably move myself to that because it would still be one Google Sheet and I could have a lot more engagement with them. I think that way, like they could see it themselves and then add, like, oh, Miss Kirk, you forgot to say this about us. And they could actually help me when it came time to grading their project. That I didn't forget, oh, yeah, remember we did this one thing.
Yeah, and I think
It's
that's
critical.
thing is like making sure that you are available for kids when questions come up, because then you can answer them and creating that class time. Because I know for me too, like as a tech coach, if my teachers don't see me, they're like, oh, Stephanie's too busy to answer this question. And I'm just not going to use that. And I'm like, no, just email me. But I think it's the same with adults. Like they need to see that you're available. They need to see that you're there. And so being available is not like checking your email. It's like walking around the room and like talking with them, or even just saying, hey, come up if you need time, or pulling kids or whatever you need to do.
Well, even with younger kids, if you think about elementary, I mean, they aren't likely to use technology to get together, right? And even, I mean, I'm talking seventh graders here. They wouldn't exchange phone numbers, which I thought was so interesting because I thought everybody texts. I mean, I text, and they have. Well, anyway, they would email each other, or they would get on the dock, say, "We're going to get on the dock at 5 o'clock tonight." Don't, and then someone wouldn't show up, and they'd freak out. It was just if they're face to face, you're that kid who's busy with extracurricular activities is setting aside time to work on it. So there's really like no excuse. You're going to get something done today because otherwise I'm watching you do nothing.
Yeah.
And my next advice, I think the big thing I wish I would have done, like my feedback for myself when I was self-evaluating, is to record it. I wish I had recorded their presentations because first of all, I would have an exemplar. I have an exemplar presentation, but I don't have like how they presented was so great. And I don't have anything to show my students like later on. Like here's a near perfect project, right? So I'm kind of bummed about that, but it also would help me grade it. So that was the other thing. I had to like try to remember, like, oh, what did this group do that was different than this group? So if you can, record it. So here's just some action steps. You want to invite your guests. That's kind of during your messy middle. You don't want to forget that you want people outside of their their peers watching it. Um, Again, I put recorded on there twice because I'm like, it's so important. I wish I would have done it. I asked everybody in the audience, whether they were a student or an outside guest, to give feedback. The student feedback looked a little different because they knew what those presenters went through, right? They knew they had to come up with they knew all the steps. So their feedback was probably more focused on process. Like, did they forget anything in their project? What do you want to know more about? What do you wish they would have said? And the guest feedback is, how overall you saw the end product, what did it look like for you? And the students know along the way. So it was a little bit different questioning. And then I had them evaluate each other. So like if Stephanie and I were partners on our project, I would evaluate Stephanie and Stephanie would evaluate me. And it was private. I made sure it was like this. No, they are not going to see this. It's just for my eyes only because I want them to be completely honest. And then they evaluated themselves. And it was so cool because I had several partners where like if I thought Stephanie didn't hold her weight, okay, and I'm like, I would write that like, I really wish Stephanie would have, I was trying to be nice because Stephanie's my friend, I really wish Stephanie would have done this one thing a lot sooner because we were really stressed at the end. Well, I would go and I would look at Stephanie's, and Stephanie would go, I really let Jen hang on that. And I really like, it was like they were so honest about their own shortcomings. And it was like such a breath of fresh air. No one was defensive or denied their part because they had all this proof, all this evidence of what they did. And then at the last part that I want to talk about is how you assign a letter to this amazing thing that they did. And I grade with a rubric.
And I love that there was two different kinds of feedback. So the audience, the like adults, they got to see the end product. So they didn't know the whole process or what was missing, or I mean, you just needed a good presenter. And sometimes you get a kid that can present and he did nothing throughout the whole process. And that does happen because there's kids that are really good at just making stuff up on the fly. But then you had other students who knew the process and could grade on that. And so I love that you had like those two pieces and then also those self-evaluations and the partner evaluations, because with the self-evaluations too, it wasn't like blaming other people. It was like focused on themselves and like what they needed to do to change and make it better.
Well, it was really funny because, yeah, you have those big personalities. You're like, okay, he's going to be a movie star someday. Like he has improv down. And you're right. It would be like he was the one who would come back and go, we rehearsed that we would say these things. And I didn't say any of my things because he said so much others stuff. And the guests loved him. So it's like,
Yeah. We've got those kids. We got those adults too.
For sure. And it's really fun to watch. So I put a link. I hope I made this public. If I didn't, I will fix the link if I didn't. Okay. So this is the rubric I used on the second project. The first one was way, way too big. It was like, this rubric has way too many pieces. So this is my condensed rubric. It has 5 areas, and it kind of spells out, below standard, approaching standard, at standard. And then I would write comments in that last column about, what they did. I would give positive and negative feedback. So if they were at standard, I would say, you guys almost went above standard here. Like, you went above and beyond what I thought was at standard, or, you were approaching and here's why you didn't get at standard. You forgot this, that, or the other. And if you notice on this rubric, there is no content on it. And that stresses some teachers out because they say, why am I doing a project if I'm not going to grade them on content? Well, here's the thing. You're already giving them instruction. You're already giving them probably formative assessments. You're probably giving them a summative assessment. You're probably giving them quizzes or a unit exam or something like that. Like you're already grading all of their content. The content had to be in the presentation. That was part of their organization, part of taking responsibility of their collaboration. So I chose not to put content grade for this project because they were already getting plenty of content grades before this. So that's a philosophy thing. And if you want to grade content, like if this is more of a less of a project based learning and more of a summative project, then yes, you're going to want to have content on your rubric. But that wasn't the focus for me. So,
and I think too, because they were doing so many teacher check-ins, this was kind of a formative assessment, this PBL project because you were able to check in with them, see how they're doing, give them feedback to improve. And so by that final summative assessment, they were ready because they went through this project with you.
Right. And also, something I forgot to put on the slides, and I'm just now remembering I should have, they practiced this. The first project, I didn't give them a practice run. The second project, I'm like, hey, let's present to each other and just verbally talk about what we think this project is lacking or what this project is really good. Like we just, every partner got up and did a very brief, like, I'm like, this isn't your real deal. Like, this is a rough draft. We're going to take 3 minutes to give us the gist of your project, show us your presentation, and we'll tell you what we think is awesome. We'll tell you what we think needs work. And then I felt like the presentations, when we did get to the adult audience, blew me out of the water. Like, they took all of the feedback to heart. And so I wanted to give them, now this grade didn't go into my summative category either. Like, I had a category that was for projects. So it was like the small little sliver for projects. And therefore I could get away with not having content as a grade. So.
Oh. And so all of those resources are in there. And then, I mean, again, if you have any questions, reach out to Jen. I'll throw her Twitter right into the chat as well. If those of you that are watching are not following her, let me get that URL for it. Anything else you wanted to share, Jen, or any wisdom?
I was going to say, the kids that bought in at the beginning with the hook and like really wanted to research their project, like it was something they were super passionate about. Because they came up with their own topic, when they had that hook and they bought in, like, I couldn't have done a better job doing what they did, like with the scatter plots, finding their lines. I mean, and then really, really describing, like, my exemplar that I'll share with you is these partners. There was a female and a male, 7th graders, right? Very passionate about the gender pay gap. That was they were just, they couldn't believe that women got paid less than men, right? So they did a comparison study. They did one systems of equations they did a line of best fit for men's wages, and then they did a line of best fit for women's wages in 1980. And then they did another one, and I believe it was 2017. I don't think it was, or no, maybe it was 2016. I think that's what it was. It was 2016. And they did the exact, so 2 totally different graphs. And it looked like women were making more money in 2016 than they were in 1980, but they were so good about their interpretation. They went in there and they're like, but the gap is the same. Like, men are still making more money. And so to me, I was like, I didn't teach them that. Like, they got in there and were like, it looks like, we're making ground, but it's really disappointing that, we're only making like 2%. So we've only made a 2% gain in 20 some years. It was just like, I don't know. I was just like, guys, really, that was not in the outline of what they had to do. And they discovered that. And I think it even fueled their passion for it even further. They're like, what can we do to fix this problem? It was like, I don't know. It was awesome.
That is so much fun. And I think too, if you would have told them, they would have been like, okay. But because they found out on their own, they took more ownership of it, and who knows what they're going to do with that information now. Probably change the world.
And the boy was so funny. He was like, it's just disgusting. I'm like, go get him.
It's so funny. All right. Well, thank you, Jen, so much for sharing your amazing PBL projects with us. And I know for sure you'll probably do this next year. So feel free to come back if you want to, whenever you're like, oh, I just made this change. We would love to have you share all that knowledge. I threw in the feedback form, so feel free to leave us feedback. And this also gets you a certificate of attendance. So feel free to fill this out if you need a certificate of attendance. And everyone, thank you. Oh, there is no part 3. We just did part 2 and part part 2, part 3 together. So
Yes.
that was really complicated to say. So this was the messy, middle, and the end. We weren't sure if we could put them together, but we were.
Yes.
So that wraps up this series. And again, if you have any questions, reach out to Jen, and she will help you in any way that she can. Use her
Absolutely.
resources and try it. Just give it a shot. All right, guys, have a
All
great
right.
day.
Thanks.